Amol Deshpande. Amol is the founder of Farmers Business Network. And we're also very fortunate here at Aanika to have him as both an investor and an advisor to our company. Amol?
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? I hope. So all good? Okay. So I thought I'd just try to quickly give some perspective from my experiences in ag about why I think this is important, why I invested in the company from my family office. You can see my background here. I've been involved in building huge companies in every portion of the supply chain. So I'm on the board of a leading vegetable seed company. I was the first investor in Beyond Meat, and I can tell you in the early days of that company, from a food manufacturing, quality, traceability standpoint, we had plenty of issues there. I was a venture capitalist, so sat on a number of boards and understand liability issues all the way through management and the chain. And then, of course, at FBN, we became one of the most disruptive ag retailers in the world and sold a lot of agrochemicals as well as other products, and had a deep understanding of the issues around that and what the risks were. A couple of perspectives I see, and I can see that there's a lot of ag retailers on the call, as well as some manufacturers and others. A couple of points I want to make on this. Right now, if you are selling ag chem in the US as a retailer, or if you're supplying it as a manufacturer and you're an overseas player, say a Chinese or an Indian player, odds are you actually don't have insurance. Most of the parties that I've talked to have said that they go naked for two reasons. I think when you're talking about overseas parties, there's some sentiment that, well, you know, if we're a Chinese or Indian company and there's a swell of litigation around something we've done, we'll simply pack up and leave. That still leaves the U.S. entities and U.S. managements and farmers and retailers exposed. But number two, it doesn't look like there's anybody who's willing to do insurance around these things. So if you're somebody who's manufacturing dicamba, distributing it, applying it as a retailer, or reselling it, there actually aren't very many options, if any, to get insurance. On glyphosate, there's definitely none. And I think for a wide variety of the other chemicals that are used, it's the same situation. So I think this is actually a very significant risk in the ag supply chain, and I think there's multiple others that exist. You know, I'll give you an example from seed. Today in vegetable seed and tomatoes, one of the leading issues is brown rugose virus. And there's very few companies that have products that are resistant to it. This can wipe out an entire crop, as an example. The list goes on of events related to inputs that could be risky. What I think is very unique here is a scientific approach combined with the parametric approach. So the ability to say, okay, if retailers, manufacturers, if we're willing to get together and ensure our entire supply chain, from the manufacturing to the retail to the farmer, that it can bring the cost down to a level that's very tolerable for everybody. Because there's risk for all those parties, as we talked about earlier in the webinar. So in reality, it's not just the manufacturer that needs coverage. Retailer needs it, applicator needs it, farmer probably needs it too. Because if you look at the way that this litigation is evolving, the idea here is if we can get the consortia of the industry together, think through this problem, that with something like parametric and with a super innovative approach like what Aanika has already with the backing of Lloyd's and others, that we could bring the cost down to cents per gallon in order to make these products safe and protected in the industry, because today they are not. I'll add one final thing before I pause, and I know we want to be efficient with everybody's time, but we also want to leave some time for questions. Is don't forget about legal exposure generally. Look, I ran an enormous technology-driven ag retailer, and I can tell you that a lot of ag retail businesses and manufacturing businesses right now in the U.S., they're either overseas companies, as I mentioned, suppliers, or they're private companies. If you are going to be a public company, it would be very, very challenging to become one without any type of insurance around these things. But also as a private company, it doesn't mean you're not exposed. There's still shareholding. So when it comes to the shareholders and protecting the shareholders of companies, the management, the boards, everything else, I think there's a whole nother layer of financial protection that's very important here. And this is why I, having experienced it from every aspect of the industry, from the downstream food side all the way upstream to seed and every portion of inputs in between, that I feel this is one of the more important products, because I think it'll allow for sustaining innovation in the space. It'll allow for these scientifically driven products to remain in the market, and it'll allow for people to feel safe buying from overseas vendors, overseas players coming to the US, selling into these markets, and then for farmers too, who are at risk themselves of getting named or having to deal with these issues. So with that, I'm going to pause and hand it back for, I think, some Q&A that's come in, as well as any other questions that people have. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Amol. So if anybody does have any questions, please do feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat. We do have at least one or two questions here. I think maybe this one best directed at Amol. I think you touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can speak a little bit more around this. With all the litigation, how do overseas and other related suppliers, as well as retailers, go about protecting themselves?
Well, I'm going to make a very clear point on this. I'm actually working on I left FBN 18 months ago. I'm working on a new project with a very, very forward-thinking cooperative called Landis in Iowa. And I can tell you that any partner that I have or anybody that I work with, including back to my old company and everything else, I would say that you should not buy from a manufacturer who cannot provide proof of insurance. Because remember, there is a whole slew of capital, receivables, other things going on in this supply chain. So if you're going and buying millions of dollars worth of goods from a manufacturer, you take possession of those. As you know, in the ag chain, you don't distribute or deliver that product to a farmer until later. There's 20 things that can happen in between. Let me give you an example of one. The EPA could make it illegal to sell some of those products. Who's on the hook for the inventory? There could be spray drift litigation. Who is responsible? Let's say there's quite a bit of it. Are we going to, as retailers, take 100% of the risk? Does a manufacturer bear any? There's environmental liabilities that can come along the way. I was surprised to learn how naked a lot of these situations are from an insurance standpoint. I think that if there were actually issues that came up, I'm not sure what anybody would do. So if you're dealing with a supplier, whether overseas or otherwise, I would suggest asking for proof of insurance. Odds are you will not be able to get it. If you don't get it, if you don't get the proof of that insurance, then find a solution. And that's part of what we're talking about here, something that's tolerable from a cost standpoint and that actually protects everybody, not just the manufacturer, not just the retailer, not just the farmer, but protects ideally the whole supply chain. But I think this is a very important reality. And as I've dug in, I've been surprised to learn that in most cases, people don't have proper insurance here, either again, because they've chosen not to get it or because it's unavailable.
Yeah. Maybe one more. Why is insurance important for, seed companies or chemical companies, as well as, just generally in the ag supply chain? How does it help how does it help all of those companies?
Well, I think if you're going to sell your product, I will tell you right now, as a buyer of ag chemicals and seed, if you have an insurance policy embedded with your product, I'm more likely to buy it than from the next person. So I think it can help with mitigating risk around sales or concerns around sales, but also differentiating players. I think it's both of those things. I don't think it's a one-trick thing. You have to have a great product as well. But if you have a great product and it works, and then you can ensure with the customer that they're not going to be at risk for any of these issues that are going to happen, I think you differentiate yourself. So I think it's super important. I think in the seed sector as well as the chem sector, but I think also in biologicals, in new products that are going through like EPA approval processes or other processes, very important to be able to provide your partners, your downstream supply chain, some security around what you're doing. So I think it's super important for anybody in that portion of the innovation to have some kind of coverage.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have at the moment. But I guess, Vishal, I don't know if you have any last words to say, or we can.
Any other questions, please put in the chat, or I think you can reach out to either of us after. But
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be posting this online as well, so feel free to reach out to anyone on our team afterwards. Dan will post Gurleen's contact information. But I think the real takeaway here is that with our approach of combining technology with insurance, we can tackle a number of different risks. And whether that's technology that Aanika's developed or the technology of our partners, it really doesn't matter. But the real sort of focus here is embedding technology in a way that's an insurance in a way that's seamless. So customers can reduce the time it takes to obtain that coverage, just having it embedded in the products they purchase anyway. And then making that whole process more efficient with no deductibles, just a faster claim process. And so, that's really what we want folks to take away from this short sort of webinar. And again, feel free to reach out with more questions.
Great. So we really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for attending this webinar. And again, please reach out and contact us if you have any further questions or if you have any ideas of how we could help you. You can contact any of us or Gurleen at the email address below. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.